Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Paribrajakacharya Stotara Sata Shri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shyamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 1, A Lifetime in Preparation. When the book was first printed, each volume had a different title to it. And this title of Volume 1 was A Lifetime in Preparation. So Srila Prabhupada, we're still on Chapter 9, A Resident of Vrindavan. Last week we read that Prabhupada had again a dream about his spiritual master, encouraging him to take sannyas. Now take sannyas and you will actually be able to accomplish this mission. Formerly the time was not right. So we'll start from here. Abai deliberated cautiously. By accepting sannyas, a Vaishnava dedicates his body, mind, and words totally to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, renouncing all other engagements. He was doing that already. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had offered sannyas to his leading disciples so that they could continue his mission. They hadn't done it. Preaching in the West had proved perilous even for the Gaudiya most recognized sannyasis. How could he, a mere householder, presume he could succeed where the others had failed? He was hesitant. The helpless, incapable feeling he had expressed in his Viraha Astakam was there. But now his spiritual master was beckoning him over all other considerations, even over natural humility. Now, although he was elderly and alone, the desire to preach just as his spiritual master had preached remained within him, a fierce, though sometimes quietly expressed determination. So there's a lot in this paragraph. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he initiated amongst his thousands of disciples about 25 to 28 sannyasis who he had thoroughly trained. They were very scholarly. They were very capable of traveling and preaching. And for the first time, he sent sannyasis out of India to preach the message of Lord Chaitanya. He sent Ban Maharaj to Germany and Bhakti Saranga Goswami to England. And they targeted the upper class people. The London Gaudiya mission was established 1934. Something was established also in Berlin. But they came back with practically no success. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was actually financially supporting them while they were in the West because they weren't able to collect funds. Thank you. Thank you, sir. It attracts the flies. And Srila Prabhupada, during the short time that he had with his spiritual master, he was still very much involved in his family maintenance as a chemist. And then when he did leave home, that was after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had disappeared. So now that Prabhupada had been anywhere from 5 to 8 years away from his family, this dream came again, and it seemed to be the right time. But how was he going to take the official status of sannyas? Because now the Gaudiya Math had more or less disintegrated into splinter groups, and the Gaudiya mission had been taken over by Bhakti Vilas Tirtha Maharaj, who was camped both at the Bagh Bazar and also at the main Chaitanya Math in Mayapur. So he was looking to whom should he turn, because in order to take sannyas you had to receive the sannyas mantra, and he wanted that to be from a Gaudiya Vaishnava, of course. And he was feeling quite helpless. As we studied in Prabhupada's Viraha Astakam, he did not see any strong preaching going on as had been done at the time of his spiritual master's presence. There was fighting even during the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and we'll hear more about what the outcome of that is as Prabhupada makes his decision to take sannyas. The Vedic standard and the example set by the previous acharyas was that if one wanted to lead a preaching movement, sannyas was required. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had taken sannyas to facilitate his missionary work. We had studied in the very early chapters how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had traveled to South India and very carefully studied both the Vaishnav sects and the Mayavadi sects. And he determined at that time that no Gaudiya Vaishnava sannyas system was there. So who was he going to accept sannyas from? And that's why Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati accepted sannyas after his spiritual master disappeared, sitting in front of his spiritual master's picture, because he was unable to take Gaudiya Vaishnava Tridandi Goswami sannyas from any living guru. Lord Chaitanya had taken sannyas to further the Sankirtan movement. Of course, Lord Chaitanya was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but when his young students had been disrespectful toward him, treating him as an ordinary man, he had taken sannyas. Because a sannyasi is automatically respected, Lord Chaitanya's acceptance of sannyas was a calculated tactic. As soon as he began traveling throughout India as a sannyasi, he immediately attracted thousands of followers to the Sankirtan movement. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu set the standard, and his direct disciples, the 6 Goswamis, they were all in the renounced order. And even Ramananda Roy, who was a Grihastha, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu encouraged him that you give up your government post, you come back to your home in Jagannath Puri, and you live with me and we will discuss spiritual topics together. So though he did not officially accept sannyas, he lived along with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and assisted with his preaching work. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a very strict sannyasi. After he accepted sannyas, he would have no association with any women, even they would have to stay very far from him even when they offered their obeisances. And he encouraged his followers, setting the example of Chota Haridas, that they also have to live very strictly following the sannyas order. Knowing that many cheaters would accept the saffron dress and abuse the respect given to sannyasis, Lord Chaitanya had advised against accepting sannyas in the age of Kali. So according to the Vedic injunctions, there are 5 things that are prohibited in Kali Yuga. One cannot perform the sacrifice of cows to give them a new life. One cannot perform the horse sacrifice. One cannot offer flesh to the forefathers. One cannot accept sannyas. And one cannot beget a child in the wife of one's younger brother. So these 5 things have been prohibited because of the misuse of all of these 5 activities in Kali Yuga. The Brahmins are unable to perform the mantras properly, so that neither the horse nor the cow that were previously sacrificed would get a new life. And those in the sannyas order, many of them were not following the principles properly. The offering of flesh was also abolished because that was being misused for meat eating. And no longer was the elder brother, after the younger brother died, did he accept the wife of the younger brother and beget children in them. All of these things were prohibited. He knew that cheaters in the guise of sadhus would act immorally, accumulate funds for their own sense gratification, and make many followers simply to enhance their own prestige. Posing as swamis, they would cheat the public. Because the people in Kali Yuga are unable to follow the rules and regulations of sannyas, Lord Chaitanya had recommended that they simply chant Hare Krishna. However, if a person could actually follow the rules, and especially if he had to spread the Sankirtan movement, sannyas was necessary. Now, Srila Prabhupada, after he came to America, he also instituted this principle of awarding sannyas to his young foreign disciples, which was completely unheard of previously. And he explained to them, this is in 1970, after he had, it was maybe 1972 when he described this. He had given first sannyas to Kirtanananda, and then there were a few disciples that he gave sannyas to here in India afterwards. Then he gave to the 4 disciples in 1970, Brahmananda, Gargamuni, Vishnujan, and Subal. And he also gave to Trivikram Swami, who is still traveling and preaching. And then 1972, Satsrup Maharaj, Sri Dayananda Maharaj, Bali Mardan. So like that, all of the preachers who were taking great risks going around the world to open centers and make disciples for Prabhupada, he awarded them with sannyas. For instance, Sri Dayananda Maharaj, he went alone to South America and began centers all over South America. Bali Mardan, he went to the Pacific Rim, Hong Kong, Philippines, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, all by himself, and began opening up temples and pulling other devotees to assist him, such as Burijan and his wife, and Sudama and Chintamani, setting them up in different centers on the Pacific Rim. Brahmananda, Gargamuni, they went to Pakistan, East and West Pakistan. Subal came here to help with the construction in the very early days when Radha Damodar was inhabited by the devotees. Trivikram Swami, he also went to Hong Kong. So Prabhupada explained that the sannyasis and the GBCs, both, because Prabhupada, as early as possible, in 1970, he instituted this GBC. He said they have the exact same function. They should travel with the Sankirtan party. They should preach. They should oversee, but not take part in direct management. The temples should be managed by the temple presidents and the devotees who live in the temples. And the GBCs and sannyasis should simply travel to make sure that all the standards were being followed, and to engage in Sankirtan, book distribution, and making devotees. So Prabhupada held those two in the same post. He wanted these sannyasis and GBCs to be personally trained by him so that after his disappearance, the society would continue without the problems that he saw Gaudiya Math experiencing. Abai first had to approach one of his godbrothers for permission. He decided to turn to Bhakti-Vilas Tirtha Maharaj, formerly Kunja Bihari, the leader of the Chaitanya Math in Calcutta. Abai still thought of the Chaitanya Math as the headquarters of his spiritual master's mission. During the heated legal disputes, the Chaitanya Math had been the most prized acquisition. That was the Bagh Bazar Math. And since 1948, it had been under the legal ownership of Bhakti-Vilas Tirtha Maharaj. So Kunja Bihari, because he's mentioned in the next few pages, I studied everything I could find about him. Particularly there's a set of books written by Bhakti Vikas Swami, and he gives a biography of each of the main disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And in 1918, one young man named Umapati came from Jessore to Mayapur looking for a Vaishnava guru. And he met Gorkishore Das Babaji and was very impressed. And he met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati at that time. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was vocally preaching against the false gurus at that time. One of them being the same person who we're having trouble with now. I'm sure all of you have heard that our dear devotee, what's his name? From New Dwarka, the vice president? Mogalila, yes. So he's being punished. He has to go stay in Govardhan for a whole month, a terrible punishment. Because he publicly spoke about the misdeeds of Ramakrishna mission. So this is going on even at this time. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was speaking against the duplicity, how the sannyasis are engaging in meat eating, and how other unspeakable activities. And Umapati had a high regard for the Ramakrishna mission. So he decided, I'm never going back to listen to this Swami again. But then he went again to Mayapur, and it just so happened he went to the home of a Kasko Swami, and the Kasko Swami fed him fish. And he was horrified because he was vegetarian. So he began to see the duplicity of what was going on, even in Sridham Mayapur, in Navadvip. So he went again to hear from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, because he was speaking honestly as a real pure Vaishnava. And he was so astounded by what he was speaking that he took leave for 2 months he was a post office clerk. He took leave and just went and stayed with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and heard from him. 1918. So he was an excellent manager. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was a reclusive scholar who lectured and wrote and enthused people to become pure Vaishnavas, but he wasn't interested in management. So he began engaging Umapati in management, because many people were coming, and who would arrange for their accommodation, who would arrange for their feeding, all of these things that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was not interested in doing, he had Umapati do. And he then initiated him as Kunja Bihari. And Kunja Bihari then arranged for the Math to be opened, the first Uttadingi Math in Calcutta. And he paid for it. Out of his postal job, he was paying for everything, for the maintenance of the devotees, for the rent, for everything. He was really supporting very much of the development of Gaudiya Math at that time. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati appreciated him very much. This went on for about 10 years. He was able to engage the devotees in service. He was able to very much engage the guests and wealthy people. It was he who encouraged Jagabandhu to donate for the construction of the Bagh Bazar Mat, the Sri Chaitanya Mat. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati really saw him as an ideal disciple. He would even have his sannyasi disciples offer their respects to Kunja Da. He would call him Kunja Da. Da means big brother. So he considered him to be a really right-hand man at that time. And when the Bagh Bazar temple was opened, just like we have here, where we're having the Bhagavatam classes now, you'll see two plaques on the wall that Prabhupada had made. The first plaque, above where the Bhagavatam speaker is a list of the main donors. And Prabhupada put on top the two principal sannyasis who were helping with the collection. $100,000 a month they were collecting for the construction of our temple here, temple, guest house, and then Gurukula. So that was Guru Kripa and Yashodanandan. And then there were other donors, the Birla Trust, and then Bogilal Patel from Gujarat, a very wealthy Vaishnava who would make programs for Prabhupada in Ahmedabad. He would treat Prabhupada just like a demigod. We went there to his house one time. I had never seen such we were embarrassed how much he was honoring Prabhupada and worshiping him. We had never seen such a thing. So Prabhupada had their names put on a plaque. And then on the other side, you'll see a plaque, and he honors the devotee who donated the land, Gita Devi Saraf. So this is done at the time of when a temple is constructed. The Acharya thanks the devotees. So what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did was, he was so appreciative of Kunjada's service that on one of the main columns of the temple, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wrote a poem about him. And I'm just going to read you this poem. Of course, this is a translation from the Bengali. In the new Sri Gaudiya Math, which Kunja Bihari Prabhu was instrumental in acquiring and constructing, because Jagabandhu looked up to him and he was encouraged by Kunja Bihari, a poem composed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was inscribed on a column. And this is the poem. The secretary of the Sri Gaudiya Math. Now this is the name. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, just like the name Bhaktivedanta was awarded to Abhay Charanaravinda by his godbrothers because he was such a great scholar. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he would award different titles to his disciples. So this was the title that he awarded to Kunja Bihari. Acharya Trika Shripad Kunja Bihari Vidyabhushan is, and these are the different things that Bhaktisiddhanta wrote. He is the main pillar in the grand temple of the Sri Gaudiya Math, the prime cause of the flourishing of the life and service of the Sri Gaudiya Math institution of service, the original architect in creating the Sri Gaudiya Math, the principal minister for the waking and development of Srila Jagabandhu's service attitude, the central jewel in the Sri Gaudiya Math's jeweled necklace of devotees, the very form of service to Sri Guru, the dearest to Sri Guru, the most distinguished assistant in fulfilling the Manobishta of Sri Guru, the foremost teacher of service to Sri Guru, and the crest jewel of tolerant service, the person dedicated to the service of the servitors of Sri Guru, and who invites the world to the service of Hari and Guru, and the topmost friend of the Gaudiyas. So the praise given by the spiritual master to this one disciple, you won't find this anywhere else. Sometimes it's said that when the spiritual master praises the disciple, it means the spiritual master is the enemy of the disciple. But here, to put this right etched into a column of the temple, it means that he was doing incredible service. Some examples that Bhakti Vikas Swami had collected were, for instance, there was a strike of the jamindars, the toilet sweepers, and they wouldn't come anywhere in Calcutta to sweep the toilets anymore. So Kunjada, he said, I will sweep the toilets. So he went and swept the toilets, which things like that were unheard of in those days. But he did that. And when there were big festivals with thousands and thousands of devotees, just like we have here, he would make sure everyone was fed first, and late at night, you would see him taking prasadam. This was all noted by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he appreciated the hard work of his disciple. He would even take loans to support the mutt. And he became so much burdened with the loans, he was only a postal clerk. He didn't know how to collect all the money that he needed. So he accepted a very lucrative job in the postal service in Mesopotamia, in Iraq. And he disappeared for one whole year. He didn't tell Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati he was going, because he went to Iraq in a place called Basra. And for 1 year he worked there. He made a lot of money. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he didn't know what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had a terrible carbuncle. A carbuncle is a huge boil. When you get a carbuncle on your back, it usually means death. So he was suffering from a very severe carbuncle. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was afraid he was going to leave his body, and his right-hand man had suddenly disappeared to Iraq without telling his spiritual master. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati kept writing to him, come back, you never told me, we need your help. So after 1 year he came back, all the money was paid, he was sending money to support the mutt while he was away, his mission was accomplished, and then he came back, and again as the secretary of the Gaudiya Mutt, he went on with his activities. So Abai understood this relationship of pure, genuine appreciation of Kunjada. Also, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he being in Leela, being a Manjari, Nayana Mani Manjari, he describes that in his letters. He also said that because Kunjada is helping him so much, he is one of the assistant Manjaris, and his name is Bimala Manjari. And the other meaning of the name Kunjada means one who can give entrance or shelter within the kunjas. So one should take service and assist in Kunjada's service within the Gaudiya Mutt. So he was very encouraging up to 1934. In 1934, because the caste Goswamis, the Smarta Brahmins, they have the Karmakandiya system of Shraddha. And Kunja Bihari's mother died. And we have the Gaudiya Vaishnava system that's given in the Hari Bhakti Vilas and given in the Sat Kriya Sar Deepika by Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So when Kunja Bihari's mother died, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati instructed him, you must follow the Shraddha given by our acharyas. you must not follow the caste Goswamis, because their system is Raghunath Smarta system. So Kunja Bihari disobeyed his spiritual master, went to his home, and performed the Shraddha according to the caste Goswami system. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wrote 3 letters to him, but he disobeyed the orders of his spiritual master. And at that time, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he said, he is the secretary of the Gaudiya Math, but he is doing this Smarta system. It will be the cause of the downfall of the Gaudiya Math. And it proved that he never had faith in Vaishnavism. So after 1934, when he saw that his principal disciple did not follow his instructions, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati became depressed. He wanted to stay for another 10 years, but he decided at that time he was going to leave the world. He came to Radhakund. He pretended that he had a heart attack, and he was going to leave the world. And he called his disciples. He sent his last letter to his disciples. And then at the very end of 1936, January 1st, 1937, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left this world. Now, before he left, during this troublesome time, 1934 onwards, 2 camps were being formed within the Gaudiya Math. There was already dissension. One was led by Kunja Bihari. The other was led by Ananta Vasudeva. Kunja Bihari was doing the managing and the collecting. And Ananta Vasudeva, he was in charge of all of the publications, the writing, the editing, seeing that everything was printed and published. But the editors, the scholars, they were dependent on the donations coming from Kunja Bihari. So if he stopped giving money, they couldn't print anymore. And he was withholding the money so they couldn't print. So there were complaints being lodged to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, many other complaints as well. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati heard the complaints. He didn't discard them. He knew that they were there. But he said, there's Vapu Seva and there's Vani Seva. And the Vapu Seva is there to support the Vani Seva. They're both important. So one is doing the Vapu Seva, the collections, the management, and the other is doing the Vani Seva, the printing and the preaching. You must work together. But after the disappearance of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, these groups split up, and the war started, and the fire broke out, and the dissensions, the litigations within the courts began, and Bhaktivilas Tirtha was successful for the most part. And the other devotees were splintered and just spread all over the place in their own private, they made their own missions, they made their own maths, and they no longer considered themselves a part of the original Gaudiya Math. So, Abai first had to approach one of his godbrothers. He decided to turn to Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, the leader of the Chaitanya Math in Calcutta. Abai still thought of the Chaitanya Math as the headquarters of his spiritual master's mission. During the heated legal disputes, the Chaitanya Math had been the most prized acquisition, and since 1948 had been under the legal ownership of Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj. So after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati he entered Samadhi, then Kunja Bihari accepted sannyas. Now, although each sannyasi had his own place or places, the Chaitanya Math and Bhaktivilasa Tirtha Maharaj legally represented the Gaudiya Math entity. Abai felt that if he were to take sannyas and go preach in America, he should give the Chaitanya Math the first priority opportunity to support his work. In April 1959, Abai wrote to Tirtha Maharaj, inquiring about sannyas, as well as about the Chaitanya Math's printing some of his manuscripts. And since no one was going abroad, he volunteered to do so on behalf of the Chaitanya Math. So Prabhupada was honestly submitting himself to the supervision of Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj by writing this letter, offering 3 types of service: for the printing, and for accepting sannyas from the Math, and also for going abroad to fulfill the vision of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's world preaching. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, when he was present, in all of his publications, every year he would write so many articles for each of the publications. Some of them were preaching in the West, some of them were the things that Prabhupada used later in his preaching, that hospital for those with the disease of material life, because he would call our temples hospitals. And some of the other things, many articles that helped the disciples to understand how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted the temples set up and how he wanted temples all over the world. Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj replied that Abai should first join the Chaitanya Math. He mentioned the strife that still lingered. This is a quote from Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj. Those who are acting against Chaitanya Math, they are motivated by their individual ambitions. Anyone, now that's end of the quote. So Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj considered that anyone who was opposed to him as the leader of the Chaitanya Math and the Gaudiya Math were acting according to their individual ambitions. Anyone who was against the Chaitanya Math, he said, was acting illogically and against the instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So according to Tirtha Maharaj, the thing for Abai to do, the thing he had neglected to do for so many years, was to join the Chaitanya Math and act under his direction. That's Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj's direction. So Abai had been avoiding this for many years because he didn't want to take part on either side. He had, Matajis, I want to ask you to please stop speaking. Stop talking or else you can go somewhere else to make the garlands, okay? Thank you. Abai did not take either side. He had his personal instructions from his spiritual master, and he was absolutely fixed in carrying out those instructions without taking sides in either party. Therefore, he didn't join either group. He was very much appreciative of the preaching going on by some of his godbrothers because he didn't see preaching going on. There was no money, there was no preaching, there was no publication going on in the Chaitanya Math at that time. Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj had sold the presses. He wasn't interested in the publications anymore. He was interested in maintaining the places that he had, and nobody new was joining. He couldn't feed them. So later, this is very interesting, when Prabhupada established the Mayapur temple, and you know, just down the road is the Chaitanya Math, which was where Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj had his headquarters in the Chaitanya Math. So he, just as we have our books about Prabhupada and we have write-ups about ISKCON and things like that, he had a write-up about the Chaitanya Math and the Gaudiya Math, describing that he was the president of the Gaudiya Math and he was leading all of the activities of the Gaudiya Math all over India. And within 1 mile you can see all of the temples of the Chaitanya Math, and he was including even Prabhupada's Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir, because 1 mile is all of the different sannyasis' temples. So there's a saying in Bengali, you can correct my pronunciation, Gaye manen apni morar. It means in a village nobody cares for him, but still one thinks, I am leader of the village. So he was establishing himself as the leader of all of his god brothers, but nobody accepted him as the leader. He was, Prabhupada, he mentioned 3 of his god brothers, Tirtha Maharaj, Sridhar Maharaj, and Madhav Maharaj. They all considered that Prabhupada was doing his preaching around the world under their supervision. So, that he is subordinate to us, under our instruction, and he is coming to see us. So they had complete misunderstanding of Prabhupada's direct instruction from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and all of his inspiration. He appreciated his God Brothers Association. No one can act as an island. We all need devotee association. But all of his inspiration and his direct instructions were coming from his Guru Maharaj. No one could claim the victory that Prabhupada had around the world. And even Prabhupada said, I'm just a servant of my spiritual master. So only, he gives all success, all accomplishments, only to his spiritual master. But they were claiming. So, this is why Bhakti-Vilas Tirtha Maharaj says, you first come and join us, and then we'll see about, so we'll hear more. Tirtha Maharaj mentioned several members of the Chaitanya Math who had recently accepted the sannyas order. And he said that Abai could also become one in time. He invited Abai to come reside at the Chaitanya Math. This is a quote from the letter, that the reply that he wrote to Prabhupada. The houses that we have, there are rooms that are airy and well lit. We will treat you exclusively. There won't be any difficulty. We will take care that no inconveniences are caused. But as for printing books, this is what he says about printing Prabhupada's books. We are eagerly awaiting to print the books like Satsandarbha, Vedanta, based on devotional service, and many other rare books by the Goswamis. First we will print them. Books written by you will be checked by the editorial staff, and if the funds can be raised, there were no funds, then they can be printed according to priority. The books will be printed only if they are favorable for the service of the Chaitanya